So as was mentioned, right? It's kind of cool, the flow. We talked about all the exciting things happening with AI, some of the foundational pieces that are needed from context protocol, a lot of the really cool use cases. And what I think is critical, and if you go to any industry event right now, everyone will say, all of this doesn't happen unless your data is right. So we're going to focus on that today and what that all means. Just a quick overview on Databricks, and I'll probably skip through some slides. I know we're a little bit behind, and there's so much value in driving some of these conversations, and we'd love to chat with folks after. So if I'm jumping ahead, it's intentional, but we won't be skipping any important information. So we've been around since 2013. I actually have the privilege of being the first Western Canadian employee. I'm celebrating 6 years this year, and it's been amazing to see our growth. Through this journey, as mentioned, been working with a ton of organizations on their modernization efforts related to data and AI, and I don't have the privilege of just working with greenfield digital native firms. You got to work with all the messiness of these legacy systems and change management and everything that comes with that. But that's what truly, in my opinion, is most rewarding. Lots of really good recognitions in terms of what our technology delivers, industry awards. We've grown to incredible amount of clients globally. From a revenue perspective, we've just been on this really cool rocket ship trajectory. But local to what's relevant to the people here, we get the privilege of doing a lot of really good work and having partnerships with governments all across Canada at all levels. Personally, I work with government of British Columbia, do a lot of work on the side with healthcare in British Columbia, as well as supporting the Alberta government. Something I really want to focus on first is this really unique, awesome partnership we have with Microsoft. So as we mentioned, there's intentional, I think Abin had called it out, Azure Databricks. And what does that really mean? So in 2018, we brokered this partnership together with Microsoft, and the partnership is under this umbrella called a first-party service. It's amazing from a lot of ways. Commercially, it's great because Microsoft technically owns the commercial product of Azure Databricks. What does that mean for you? Is it's just available to you through all of your agreements that you have with Azure. It comes in on an Azure bill. So from a procurement perspective and an adoption perspective, it's a utility that you can just adopt, which is amazing, right? Especially in the world that we all work with. Integration-wise, it's really great as well. We have a ton of our engineers that work in the Microsoft office and vice versa, co-developing together. So when Andrew's mentioning things that are super important, like what are we trying to do? Break down silos, unify the data, but still recognize that there's really good tooling across this ecosystem that you might want to use depending on your problems and the right fit solution. These integrations, specifically, let's call out Fabric, enabling mirroring and functions like federation allows you to still use a single source of data, not break the governance and the lineage, which is super critical to having a single source of truth, and then enabling the right type of capabilities for what you want. And that's kind of what we see here in some of the examples that were called out today. So Abin had mentioned the Lakehouse, and I'll do a little bit of kind of a history lesson walking through the Lakehouse. We've been doing this now for 6 years. We pioneered this notion, and I was part of the company when we did it, and I thought it was very ambitious, and maybe one day the folks in Canada will start to adopt this, because breaking down the barriers between a data warehouse and a data lake seemed kind of crazy. Like the type of data it supports, the governance layers, the downstream application of this type of data was just very different. Fast forward, and now it's table stakes. Whether it's any technology on the market, it's kind of an assumption that you're going to unify your architecture to support both unstructured and structured data and downstream enable analytics all the way through agentic AI out of a single architecture. So really, what does this mean when we break it down? Because Lakehouse is a very thrown around word, so there's some critical components to what makes a Lakehouse really work. So first is an open storage format. We talk a lot about today is Delta. We brought Delta Lake to the market. It provides ACID transactions and compliance, which is critical for the way data needs to be used for both a warehouse and a data lake. We also support Iceberg and Parquet. So we kind of broke down any dependencies as long as it's an open format. It works for you. And that's one of our core principles of development, open source in everything we do, cloud native everything we do, and AI enabled, and that's been from day one. The cataloging is really important. So being able to provide all those capabilities out of your data, I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this. But that's really where we put a bet, and we really matured our development, is enabling all the capabilities beyond just discovery and lineage and auditing. What are all these key functions? And some of the folks today were calling out some of the things that people want to do with their data, and it really sits within that data enablement layer and data cataloging layer in order to function. And then off of a single source of data, you need to be able to have the flexibility on compute. So decoupling your compute, using the type of compute that's needed, whether you're a SQL developer, you're going to use Python, et cetera. Downstream, it's really unlocking all the capabilities to democratize out that data. So now that that's table stakes and kind of everyone is really enabling those capabilities, we move into this new chapter, which is all about data intelligence. So what does that really mean? It's enabling that data. So you've now cataloged that data, you're governing the data, you've provided the data all those capabilities. So how do you leverage natural language to make it easily accessible and discoverable? How do you enable native AI capabilities to simplify the way that you operate with the data? And then how do you use AI capabilities, again, for the type of governance and security that you want? So this is embedded right into the platform natively. And then we talk about the modernized way that people can now work with the data. You move from changing knobs, and I think in one of the earlier sessions, there was a great kind of breakdown in terms of how AI development has changed over time. This is the same way in terms of how you modernize the way that you work with the data from a data engineering persona across workload management, query engine management, data layout, the things that used to take a lot of manual time. Now leveraging telemetry, you think about it differently in terms of how you interact with the data, and you really simplify a lot of that process. So what does this mean for data governance and enablement? So as mentioned, it's an interesting term, because if you say governance, that's very all-encompassing. And then if you just break it down to cataloging, people usually just assume, okay, yeah, I've got access controls and auditability of the data. But really what you need to enable that data for true democratization, it expands way beyond that. And that's all wrapped around Unity Catalog, which is embedded within the platform as your data catalog. So discovery, I think we talked about that opportunity. Hey, I want to share the data with peer entities across the government, but there's also other entities that make a lot of sense for us to build an ecosystem with. The really neat thing that follows our open source and open standards approach to how we develop is with Delta sharing. It doesn't matter what type of IP is on the other side to share data. You can share data with any partner and do it securely and in a modernized fashion. All the types of cost controls and observability, and you're able to stretch this across all of your data set. I'll skip through this. I really like it though, because it kind of breaks down to a user journey trying to find a book in a library, and all the things you typically want to do and get frustrating, and then how those capabilities enable. But ultimately, when you look at the value drivers of doing this, there's kind of the technical lens, and a lot of us understand this. But how do we communicate this to the broader stakeholders on why this is so critical? These fundamental things could often get overlooked, which lead to a lot of tech debt downstream and a lot of pains downstream for rework. So ultimately, there's three value pillars of setting up your data well from a governance perspective. The ability to quickly discover that data, not have to rework the data manually triage the data and tune the data just in order to make it usable. That ability to enable self-service, so unlock that data to downstream users to do their type of work, whether it's self-serve data, product development, or analytical product development, and doing it in a secure and governed way, and then mitigating the risks around that. So bringing in the right type of policies and auditing, things that, again, take a ton of work and get in the way of really enabling that data, are now embedded in the capabilities. So a really nice visual. It's benchmarked off of actually one of our Canadian banks, but in the work that I've done with organizations, this is really where we start to see that magic happen. Is we make it really easy to now mobilize that data for downstream value. So typically, just providing that access to data is such a long journey with a lot of manual effort. It really prevents, from a cost perspective, a timeline perspective, a complexity perspective, the ability to innovate on that data. When you make that data simply available, you really speed up and simplify the costs on being able to drive the right types of insights with that data. So now that we have that all done, I'm going to expand a little bit on what Abin was talking about in terms of the capabilities that are available from a data engineering perspective within Databricks. So everything starts with good data. I think everybody understands the concept of that, but then when we put it into practice, what does that mean? So we have a layer within Databricks, it's called Lakeflow, and that covers the workflow of managing ingest, transformations, and orchestration of the data, setting up the medallion architecture, as was mentioned. So when we talk about connecting in the data, we're able to now simply, instead of manual work, complex types of integrations, additional costs, we're building out this ecosystem where you simply point and click, right? It's available through API and UI, critical data sources like Oracle, SQL, the SaaS resources, Workday, and all these pieces. It's a continuing ecosystem. It's efficient end-to-end, both from a development perspective and a cost perspective, and it embeds all the type of auditing and lineage and security that we talked about. So here's a quick snapshot on the continuing growing ecosystem, but typically captures a lot of the type of critical data sources that people are trying to get into the Lakehouse to enable for analytics. So now we talk about how you curate that data and build out your pipelines. So things, where there's decision trees that we've typically worked through historically. Okay, is this going to be for a batch? What's the type of SLAs? I know that was something that was called out earlier as well. How do you mobilize between them, right? Or how can you be agile between that? Well, within one single architecture, you could set up batch and streaming. Really having that automated configuration, CDC, the types of things, again, that typically require a lot of architectural and development overhead, really simple and integrated into the capability. And all built within an open standard as well. Let's click through here. And then lastly, orchestration. So automation, AI-enabled capabilities in terms of how you orchestrate your pipelines, having the observability and all the metrics embedded within your pipelines, as well as checks on reliability and performance. So this is really what makes Databricks stand out, is the maturity and the simplicity that we enable data engineering while still providing that comprehensive capabilities with large-scale data, complex pipelines, and a lot of demands downstream. So once we have this data, what type of things can you do to unleash it? So we have great connectivity into Power BI and Fabric, as well as the ability to work within that single source of truth. Self-service and query your data because it's been governed and cataloged so well. It understands all the different semantics of your data and the type of user that you're using. Have a very well curated, workable type experience for self-service and Q&A, stand up ad hoc dashboards, explore the data, enable it with data intelligence and AI, and again, locking back into everything that is governed, secured in terms of how you leverage that data through a Unity catalog. So we talked about a lot of really cool NLP and agentic use cases, a lot of great value, a lot of excitement in that. And then I'm going to take on the job of talking about the boring AI because there's so much value in that, and it's something that's really easy to mobilize on. So through this data, what can you do that has a broad swath of type of use cases that could take advantage of this, and anybody can really leverage this function. You don't have to become an expert in LLMs or anything like that. So we're going to talk about this batch inference layer. So if we take a look at the typical journey, again, it's really easy to get drawn into all the shiny objects and kind of miss a lot of that opportunity and value on the table that is native within how you can use it. So we'll talk about AI functions that are embedded right into the platform. So the same way that you'd be developing your queries and your syntax, you can leverage these AI functions, and then as well as incorporating Gen AI into your data pipeline through batch inference. So an AI function, what did you have to do before? To enable AI on your data, you'd have to have engagement with the ML engineers, you'd have to pick your custom models, move data around to the models, rebuild out the compute, and end-to-end pipelines to support it. And now with one simple SQL function, you could leverage that same type of capability for pretty much any user to run. What does that kind of look like? So there's task-specific functions, a simple one-liner SQL for common tasks like summarization, translate, analyze, etc. Run a simple query that will run LLMs. And then we have a capability for agent bricks, which is, again, a very user-guided experience on leveraging agents within the data. Why is it easy to mobilize, and why am I saying, you know, these type of things are kind of at the disposal of the users? It's fully serverless, zero setup, production ready. It works within your data, again, no portability, no rework of the data, and then you can control the outputs. And ultimately, this is a really low cost function as well, so high value and low cost in enabling these capabilities. A couple benchmarks. And then let's talk about batch inference. This is something that's really cool and interesting, and we've been spending a lot of time on with clients for a few things. So what is batch inference? We've come to realize that maybe not everybody is fully aware of this capability and what you can do. So you take a huge data set, instead of running it iteratively on a data set, you take the huge store data set and you run a pre-trained model against it. Why that's really cool? Or I guess why Databricks? So you can use any model that you want, whether it's Claude, OpenAI, etc. You don't have to move the data, and it works really, really well at scale in a very cost-effective way. So through the process, effectively, you're using batch inference, again, SQL commands, so really accessible to a broad scale of users. You can parse complex documents, images in one simple line of code. You can extract the right type of information. You can generate new products and descriptions on that data. You can simply summarize, and you can standardize as well. So critical pieces and able to gain better insights out of your data, which used to be very manual and challenging. And what I love here is this maps to a ton of use cases. So I would challenge almost everybody in this room could probably have some type of relevancy to one of these use cases as an example that's laid out here. And then to talk through, you know, a real life use case that we've seen deployed. So problem statement from one of our clients was, you know, there's 5,000 contracts. They need to figure out which ones are active by the end of the year. This would typically take a lot of heavy lifting, a lot of work, risk to errors. And simply we ran 40,000 tokens to process all of these documents. And what I love is when we talk about how simple this is to productionize and to leverage, we're talking about weeks here versus, you know, some use cases that have the complexity of months. So that's the rundown. I think I hopefully caught us up on time here as well. But things that I wanted to pick around, you know, a big, unified, powerful platform with an amazing ecosystem that mapped well into our conversations and our focus today. Yeah, love to chat with you after if there's any questions. Yeah.
How do you define the user's scope for when they're interacting with an agent to try to ask questions about data, so that they can only see the stuff that's applicable to them, or maybe even within a role?
Yeah.
So I'm here as a permitting inspector looking at water licensing.
So we just integrate natively into, like we leverage ABAC and RBAC. So everything that's already been defined, we provide all of those types of access controls out of the definitions that have already been done through AD and all those pieces. Yep. Cool. Thank you.